The Isle of Man, of course, once known for spuds and heron and its amazing tourist industry in the Victorian times. Well, that may have passed by slightly these days, but now, of course, internationally, it might be known as a tax haven. That's a term the Isle of Man government strongly denies, saying that implies bank secrecy.
Well, the threat perceived a few weeks ago was a very real one, that the Isle of Man would be included on a blacklist of tax havens and thereby would be subject to all sorts of penalties from the rest of the world, particularly after the G20 meeting. In the last few weeks, the Isle of Man has been negotiating tax agreements. In fact, it has been negotiating these for years, has got up to this figure of a magic dozen tax agreements. Now, this, according to the OECD, means that it's seen as a responsible tax haven, and there's no more the threat that it's going to be on the blacklist. I understand they've been told they're not going to be on the blacklist. Now, the interesting thing is there going to be a blacklist? Because it's now the indication is perhaps this idea of a blacklist was waved around in front of the tax havens to make them behave. And of course, we've seen Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Andorra, all of these people queuing up to say, please, yes, we will sweep away a part of our secrecy. It seems to have done the trick. But the problem is, it seems Gordon Brown wants more than that. So we're going to have to wait and see what exactly he produces.
Is it fair to call the Isle of Man a tax haven? Because, I mean, obviously the government doesn't like that term.
Tax haven is looked down on very much in the Isle of Man. We've been an offshore jurisdiction for some time, and there's other phraseology. Tax haven is very much, I suppose you could say, the smutty end. It's the people who still are secrecy jurisdictions. The buzz phrase at the moment is secrecy jurisdiction. Those are the ones who the global economy, the finance ministers are gunning for. The Isle of Man regards itself as not a secrecy jurisdiction. It says it's very open. If people come regarding information, regarding iffy accounts, it is more than happy to help them. It is not, it emphasises, a secrecy jurisdiction.
Explain what sort of percentages of people this could all affect in the Isle of Man. What sort of knock-on effect if the worst scenario came out on Thursday and the Isle of Man was on some sort of list?
The worst scenario, of course, is the old phrase spuds and herring, of course. The Isle of Man has an enormous finance sector. Now, I suppose you could say about 40% is involved with the finance sector, but it's a knock-on effect. It's the advocates, all the businesses that are allied to the finance sector. If the finance sector went, and there's no question of it going at the moment, but if it went, it would probably take a lot of those with it, and the Isle of Man would be in real trouble. It would have to probably fall back on things like its manufacturing sector, which is not enormous, and of course tourism, which could see a new renaissance because of the economic squeeze and people not wanting to travel so far to go abroad for their holidays anymore.
How do you feel it's going to go on Thursday? What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a blacklist. If there is, I think it's been negotiated away, if I can put it that way. But Gordon Brown will want to be seen to be tough on the tax havens. The finger has been pointed, and he can't just evaporate now. He has to do something. What exactly they want the tax havens to do, that is going to be the crucial matter. At the moment, if they just say, you have to help us when we make inquiries, that's fine. The Isle of Man says, we do that already. If it's more than that, if they say, you have to open up your books all the time and expose everything in there, well, of course, the Isle of Man will quite rightly say, no, we're not going to have that, and be fairly annoyed.
Briefly explain all these tax agreements that have been signed. The Isle of Man seems to have been ahead of the game anyway by signing them from some time ago. There seems to be a bit of a scurry from other jurisdictions on signing things. What is so important about these documents they're signing?
The Isle of Man is ahead of the game. About 4 or 5 years ago, it started negotiating. It's a long, drawn-out process with the French and the Germans. You not only have to find out what exactly you're signing, you have to make sure the ministers are available at the right time to sign it. So this has been going on a long time. It's not just happened at the last moment. For other jurisdictions, yes, there has been a wild scramble. I think Guernsey signed about 3 in 1 week because they were desperately worried. The Isle of Man says it's seen this coming for a long time. It's been on one of the groups of the OECD. It's been aware of this happening for some time, and for 5 or 6 years it's been keen on building up its store of tax agreements and, of course, double taxation agreements as well. So it feels it's well placed here. The others, yes, there has been a scramble.
Do you think it's business as usual after this? I mean, nothing on Thursday is going to come out definitive, do you think? I mean, it's just going to be like the budget. Afterwards, things drip out more with actually giving exact details of what is going to happen.
It's not going to be business as usual. It's changed. Just as it has for the banking sector, it will have changed for the tax havens. The tax havens have never had this much publicity as they have in the last 3 months. The word tax haven is now on virtually every lip. So whatever happens after G20, when they leave London, and it's probably all they're going to agree with really is when they should meet again and it's an urgent matter, the chances are that the times have changed for the tax havens and new regulations are bound to be brought in.
And this is the hub of the operation. This is Athol Street. Now, in the Isle of Man, nearly 40% of the working population work in the finance sector. Gordon Brown says he wants more transparency with these offshore banking sectors. The Isle of Man government believes they've done this, citing they've signed more tax exchange agreements with countries than any other small jurisdiction.
G20 is coming up. Your company is very much in the offshore business of finance, and there's been rhetoric from Mr. Brown and others about wanting to draw a line under this offshore operation. Your views?
Well, first of all, offshore. What does offshore mean? What I tried to get across is, instead of using the terminology offshore and onshore, because it actually doesn't make much sense, I'd rather use the terms compliant and non-compliant. I.e., is a country compliant? Is a country well regulated? Do they allow businesses to operate in a way which can harbour tax fraud and money laundering? What the Isle of Man clearly is a compliant country. So I'd rather get away from offshore, which clearly is the image, and everyone talks about offshore. But when you narrow it down, the G20, clearly it's politically driven. Clearly they're looking for scapegoats to blame the recession and perhaps some of their mistakes on. And Isle of Man is part of this hostility which has been shown against small financial centres like the Isle of Man, whether we are compliant or not. And it is a critical time for the Isle of Man's future. And we can only hope that common sense prevails, and it's not something which is designed for political votes and personal missions.
Are you worried for the Isle of Man's future?
Yes, if the G20 politicians carry forward their rhetoric and put forward some what they're calling imposing sanctions. Now, it's not clear what sanctions are, but if they do carry forward their threats of imposing sanctions against places like the Isle of Man and uncooperative places around the world, that there are many, if the Isle of Man is brought in to that club, then yes, we do have a problem. The general consensus now seems to be that Isle of Man has demonstrated for a number of years that it is cooperative. It has signed more than a dozen tax information exchange agreements, so we cannot be accused of being uncooperative. We cannot be accused of being unregulated. So clearly the Isle of Man should not be in this club of unregulated and uncooperative and secrecy jurisdictions.
Worst scenario, how could it affect your business, and if there's a blacklist and the Isle of Man appears on it?
Well, it affects our business if we are based here in the Isle of Man, which we clearly are. We employ nearly 150 people, and I would fear for our future. If the Isle of Man is blacklisted and sanctions are imposed against the Isle of Man and businesses from the Isle of Man, then yes, we do have a problem. I like to think we can always find solutions and ways in which we can continue our business, but until we know exactly what the G20 are proposing, it's difficult to actually begin to tackle it.
Do you think the Manx government's done enough to keep off any sort of list?
I don't know the exact details, and I don't know the precise meetings that they've had, but from what I've seen and the discussions I've had, I would say yes, particularly from the Treasury side, and the efforts of the Isle of Man government have been in the best interest of the Isle of Man, and have been, in fairness, trying to demonstrate the Isle of Man's willingness to cooperate and the Isle of Man's willingness to be more transparent.
What do you think the future of the Isle of Man could look like?
I think clearly the Isle of Man still has a strong future. We are, I think, fortunate in that we have a very good business community here. The Isle of Man government, working in cooperation with the private sector, over the last number of years has realised that it cannot rely totally on the financial sector. So we have seen diversity, e-commerce, the space industry.
I mean, you've got nearly 150 staff. I mean, you're one of many players as well, one of the bigger ones. But overnight, you could just be wiped out. Is that the worst scenario?
No, I think that's a bit unlikely. Invariably, what we see, and we've seen it over the years with changes in legislation, is that you have to adapt your business. I don't think there'll ever be the sort of doomsday scenario of a complete shutdown overnight. Worst case scenario is sanctions are brought in by G20, which prohibits you from providing solutions and services to your clients from the Isle of Man. Certainly in the longer term, it could have drastic effects on the Isle of Man if there are sanctions imposed by the G20. We don't know what those sanctions might be. They might not exist at all. We'll have to wait and see.
What will you be doing on Thursday?
I think, like most, very apprehensive, watching the news, looking for the early releases. I'm not sure whether there will be public releases on Thursday. They may just be locked in discussions at the Excel Centre in London. We'll have to wait and see for the official announcements. And of course, it's similar to budgets. You may get the headlines, and it's the detail that follows sometime afterwards that you really need to focus on.
In a soundbite then, how's the Isle of Man going to fare?
I'm fairly confident the Isle of Man has done enough to demonstrate that it is a cooperative, well-regulated financial centre. The concern I have is that this is a different view, or a different view is placed upon us by members of the G20 and other superpowers. I'm concerned that they are looking for scapegoats. I'm concerned that they're looking for someone else to blame for the global recession. And the Isle of Man is a small country which is easy to target. So on the face of it, I think we have done enough to demonstrate and to prove that we should not be attacked like we have been attacked. But I am concerned that the politicians involved from the EU and further afield take a different view on this.
Well, you can guarantee that most people here at government buildings will be watching the G20 conference very closely. One thing is pretty certain, there are some major challenges ahead for the Manx financial sector.